So putting a deck pad on, there's a few things that you want to consider when you're choosing your pad. So firstly, you want to have a think about the shape of the pad and kind of like the arch on it. People like very different things. Some people like a flatter pad, some people like a pad with more of an arch or a higher kick. So this really is just down to personal preference. So you want to consider that when you're looking at pads. The other main thing to consider when you're thinking about buying a pad is the tail shape of your board. Obviously, if you've got a board such as a Neckbeard 2 here with a really wide tail, you're going to want to pick an appropriate pad so that it's going to fit on that tail really nicely. There's often, with deck pads, there's going to be kind of wider pad cuts, something like the JS wide pad. That's what I'd be kind of choosing to go on something like the Neckbeard 2 here. That's a 3-piece, you can splay it out a little bit, it's going to fill that tail really, really nicely. So for me, for a board like that, that's what I'd be kind of looking at. Underneath, we've got a little prototype of one of our own models. That's something that we're going to get ready to surf and take out next time there's some swell, so we're going to put a pad on that board. It's a much narrower tail than the Neckbeard, so you'll see the pad I've chosen to go on this one. It's kind of a more standard size, just so it fits on the tail of that board better. So with this board, it's got this little double kind of wing and a really pulled in little pintail, so I've just chosen the Modem Dusty Pane pad. It's a pretty standard sized pad, but this is going to fit onto this tail really, really nicely. Also, I kind of really like the arch on this pad. The Modem pads are great, they come in this eco packaging, and the nice thing about them is you can get them out of the packaging and lay them onto the board before you apply the pad. With other deck pads that might be in kind of on a board or on a wrapper, you can kind of offer them up to the board and do the same thing just to check that it's going to fit. It's always worth doing if you're in the shop, or if you've got a new board and you've got the new pad there. Before you apply it, it's always worth planning out exactly what you're going to do. So for this one, I'll get rid of that, put that on there. So personally, I like to line it up and just have a think about where I'm going to place it. It's always worth considering where you want your pad to be. So you really want your back foot to be over the fins for when you're surfing. You also, one thing that I would often say to people in the shop is you want to consider wherever this arch bar is, whether the back of the pad is, that's the furthest back you're ever going to be able to put your foot on the board. So if you have it up here, that's really no good. You never know when you're going to want to just slide your foot a little bit further back. So personally, I would say get it as far back as you can, really. That way you can always bring your foot further forward, but that's wherever this kind of part of the pad is, it's going to be as far back as your foot's ever going to go. Some people like to kind of lay the pad down, maybe mark on with a pencil where you're kind of going to put each individual piece of the pad, which can be really worth doing. If you want to do that. And also one thing to consider, this is a stringered PU board, so when you've got a board with a stringer, it makes life a lot easier for putting a pad on, because you can kind of line up and use this stringer as your centre point. If you're applying a pad to a board that hasn't got a stringer, maybe an EPS board, something like one of the Firewires that doesn't have that kind of central stringer line, you might just want to kind of use a string line or something like that and mark kind of a central point on the board, just so that you can kind of get your pad in the right place first time. So another important part of the preparation for putting your pad on, it's always worth giving the tail of the board a bit of a clean or wipe, just with a cloth, or you can kind of use some white spirit or something like that, just to kind of get any dust or any grime that might be on there. Particularly if it's a board that has been waxed previously, you're going to have to clean it really, really well. Scrape all of the wax off and definitely get every individual bit of kind of dirt or wax or whatever off the board. Otherwise this will really stop the pad from sticking to the board and kind of risk the pad coming off at some point. So most pads will come with the kind of sticky back that you just pull off, and then that's ready to be applied. You want to get this right, because you've got a little bit of time where if you stick part of it down, you can maybe put it off and stick it back down, it's going to be alright, but you kind of want to get it right first time. Personally, I would always start with the centre piece of the pad, as this gives you a really good reference point then for the other pieces, so really the central part is the most important. And I'm just going to put this kind of just almost right back to where the leash plug is. I like to get the pads really nice and far back. As I was saying, I think that's really important for when you're surfing. You want to be able to slide your foot back as far as possible. So you just want to press the pad down, make sure it's nice and even, and then just give it a nice firm push down to the board. I find once you've got this central piece applied, that's kind of half the battle over really. Pads come in all different all different cuts. You can have 3-piece, 2-piece, or sometimes just 1-piece pads as well. This one's obviously a 3-piece, so we're going to use this central one to line up the other two. So same again on the other side. We're just going to pull this off. And then with this, I'm just going to line the back of the pad up, and then just leave a little gap from the central one. That's personal preference, you don't have to do this, but I'm thinking for this board, that's just going to fill the tail really nicely, and that's kind of just what I like to do on the pads of my board. So for me, that kind of generally seems to work. And then just the same on the other side. So we're just making sure we push it all down, all over the pad, and just apply it nice and evenly. On this side, I'm just going to focus on getting that lined up and just having about the same gap on the other side, as close as you possibly can. And then I'll just like to give it a nice firm push down, make sure it's all stuck on there. It's also worth noting, before you actually go to surf the board, it's worth leaving it overnight for the pad to really kind of get set to the board and stick on there. You want to leave a bit of time. You want to leave a bit of time before you first surf the board after you've applied the pad, just so that it really sticks to the board. So I've got my deck pad applied, and we're ready. Just need some swirl. I can't wait to test this board out. Like I say, you normally give it a little bit of time before you surf the board after you put the pad on. And a lot of the stuff with applying a pad, you'll find you have your own certain kind of personal preferences that kind of you like, or positioning, or kind of what pad to pick. But for me, that one looks good, and so I'm ready to go.